Rosa wiped down the marble countertop one last time before stepping back to admire her work. The kitchen gleamed under the afternoon sunlight streaming through the tall windows. Every surface sparkled, every dish was in its proper place, and the sweet scent of lemon cleaner filled the air. This was her favorite part of the day, when everything was perfect and ready for Mrs. Catherine to enjoy her evening tea. 3 years had passed since Rosa first knocked on the door of the grand Victorian house on Maple Street. She remembered that day clearly. Her hands had been shaking as she rang the doorbell, clutching her resume and hoping desperately for a chance. Jobs were hard to come by, especially for someone like her who spoke English as a second language and had limited experience with wealthy families. Mrs. Catherine had opened the door herself that day, which surprised Rosa. Most rich people had others answer their doors. But there stood this elegant woman in her 70s with silver hair perfectly styled and kind blue eyes that seemed to see right into Rosa's soul. She was wearing a simple blue dress and pearl earrings, nothing too fancy, but she carried herself with the grace of someone who had lived a full and interesting life. "You must be Rosa," Mrs. Catherine had said with a warm smile. "Please come in. Would you like some tea before we talk?" That simple gesture of kindness had meant everything to Rosa. In her previous job interviews, she had been made to feel small and unimportant. But Mrs. Catherine treated her like a guest, not just someone looking for work. They sat in the beautiful living room surrounded by antique furniture and family photos, sipping tea from delicate china cups while they talked. Mrs. Catherine explained that she had been living alone since her husband passed away 2 years earlier. The house felt too big and too quiet without him. She needed someone who could help keep it clean and organized, but more than that, she needed someone who understood that this wasn't just a house. It was a home filled with memories. "My Harold collected things," Mrs. Catherine had said, gesturing toward the glass cabinets filled with vintage pocket watches and rare coins. "Each piece has a story. I need someone who will care for them the way he did." Rosa had nodded, understanding completely. Her own grandmother had been the same way, treasuring every small object that held meaning. She promised Mrs. Catherine that she would treat everything with the respect it deserved. The job started simply enough. Rosa would come 3 days a week to clean, do laundry, and help with grocery shopping. But it quickly became clear that Mrs. Catherine needed more than just household help. She was lonely. Her children lived far away and rarely visited. Her husband's death had left a hole in her life that cleaning products and fresh flowers couldn't fill. Rosa found herself staying longer each day, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. After finishing her cleaning duties, she would sit with Mrs. Catherine and listen to stories about the old days. Mrs. Catherine would tell her about her late husband's business trips, the dinner parties they used to host, and the adventures they had traveled the world together. "Harold was in international trade," Mrs. Catherine would say, her eyes lighting up with memories. "He brought back treasures from every country we visited. That vase came from Japan, those rugs from Turkey, and this jewelry box from India." Rosa loved these stories. Each object in the house came alive with history and meaning. She learned to dust the Japanese vase with extra care, knowing it represented a romantic trip Harold and Catherine had taken for their anniversary. She polished the Turkish rugs gently, imagining the bustling markets where they had been purchased. As months passed, their relationship grew beyond employer and employee. Mrs. Catherine began asking Rosa about her own life, her family back home, her dreams for the future. Rosa shared stories about her children, how she was working to save money for their education, and how grateful she was to have found such a wonderful job. "You're not just my housekeeper, dear," Mrs. Catherine said one afternoon as they shared lunch together. "You're my friend." Those words touched Rosa deeply. She had never expected to find friendship in this job, but here it was, growing naturally between two women from different worlds who had found common ground in their shared humanity. Mrs. Catherine began confiding in Rosa about things that worried her. She talked about her nephew David, Harold's brother's son, who had started visiting more frequently since Harold's death. David always seemed interested in the valuable items around the house, asking questions about their worth and making comments about how much space they took up. "I don't understand why he's suddenly so concerned about my living situation," Mrs. Catherine would say with a frown. "He keeps suggesting I should downsize, move to a smaller place. But this is my home. Harold and I built our life here." Rosa listened carefully to these concerns, She had met David a few times when he visited, and something about him made her uncomfortable. He was polite enough, but there was something calculating in the way he looked around the house, as if he was making mental notes of everything valuable. The friendship between Rosa and Mrs. Catherine deepened with each passing month. They developed their own routines and traditions. Tuesday afternoons were for going through old photo albums together. Thursdays meant baking cookies using Mrs. Catherine's mother's recipes. Fridays were for rearranging flowers and discussing the week's events. Rosa took genuine pride in maintaining the house. She knew exactly how Mrs. Catherine liked things arranged. The morning newspapers folded just so on the breakfast table. The antique clocks wound at precisely the right time. The family photos dusted and positioned to catch the best light. Every detail mattered because this wasn't just a job anymore. It was caring for someone she loved. Mrs. Catherine, in turn, became genuinely interested in Rosa's welfare. She helped Rosa practice her English, encouraged her ambitions for her children, and even gave her small bonuses when money was tight at home. Their relationship had become a source of joy and comfort for both women, but neither of them realized that someone was watching their growing friendship with growing resentment. Someone who saw Rosa not as a blessing in Mrs. Catherine's life, but as an obstacle to plans that had been forming in the shadows. The perfect world they had built together was about to be tested in ways neither of them could imagine. Rosa first noticed something was wrong on a Tuesday morning in October. She had arrived at Mrs. Catherine's house at her usual time, letting herself in with the key she had been trusted with for over a year. Everything seemed normal at first. The morning sun was streaming through the windows just like always, and the house smelled of the lavender sachets Mrs. Catherine kept in her linen closets. But as Rosa began her routine, something felt off. The small crystal figurine that usually sat on the mantelpiece in the living room was missing. In its place was a different ornament, one that belonged in the dining room. Rosa stood there for a moment, puzzled. Mrs. Catherine was very particular about where things belonged. She would never move items around randomly. When Mrs. Catherine came downstairs for breakfast, Rosa mentioned the moved figurine. Mrs. Catherine paused, looking confused for a moment. "Oh, that," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "I must have moved it while dusting yesterday. You know how I am about keeping busy." But Rosa knew this wasn't true. Mrs. Catherine never did her own dusting anymore. Her arthritis made it difficult, and besides, that was what Rosa was there for. Still, Rosa didn't want to argue with her employer, so she simply nodded and made a mental note to put the figurine back in its proper place. Over the next few weeks, more strange things began happening. Rosa would arrive to find books moved from their usual spots on the shelves. A valuable silver picture frame disappeared from the bedroom, only to reappear days later in a completely different room. Each time Rosa mentioned these occurrences, Mrs. Catherine would give vague explanations or seem genuinely confused about what Rosa was talking about. The situation became more unsettling when Rosa started receiving phone calls at home. The first call came on a Thursday evening while she was helping her daughter with homework. The voice on the other end was muffled, as if the person was trying to disguise it. "Is this the woman who works for the old lady on Maple Street?" the voice asked. Rosa's heart started beating faster. "Who is this? What do you want?" "Just wondering about your schedule. When do you work there? What days are you not around?" The line went dead before Rosa could respond. She stared at the phone in her hand, feeling a chill run down her spine. Who would want to know her work schedule? And why wouldn't they identify themselves? The next morning, Rosa told Mrs. Catherine about the strange phone call. Mrs. Catherine looked concerned for a moment, but then seemed to brush it off. "Probably just a wrong number, dear." You know how these telemarketers can be these days. But Rosa wasn't convinced. This didn't feel like a telemarketer. This felt like someone gathering information for a specific purpose. She decided to be more alert and pay closer attention to everything happening around the house. Her vigilance paid off the following week when she noticed a dark blue van parked across the street from Mrs. Catherine's house. It was there when she arrived on Monday morning, and it was still there when she left that afternoon. The windows were tinted so she couldn't see inside, but something about it made her nervous. On Tuesday, the van was there again. This time, Rosa made sure to get a good look at the license plate. She wrote down the numbers on a piece of paper and tucked it into her purse. When she mentioned the van to Mrs. Catherine, the older woman seemed unconcerned. "Oh, that's probably just someone visiting the Johnsons down the street. They have family coming and going all the time." But Rosa knew the Johnsons and their visitors never parked that far from their house. This van was positioned specifically to have a clear view of Mrs. Catherine's front door and driveway. The phone calls continued throughout the week. Sometimes they came during the day while Rosa was at work, sometimes in the evening at home. The questions were always similar. What time did Mrs. Catherine usually go to bed? Did she have any other help besides Rosa? Were there certain days when the house was completely empty? Rosa stopped answering these calls directly, but she began keeping a record of when they occurred. She also started varying her schedule slightly, arriving at different times and taking different routes to the house. If someone was watching her movements, she wanted to make them harder to predict. Then came the incident with the security cameras. Mrs. Catherine had a simple security system installed after Harold's death, mainly for peace of mind. It wasn't anything fancy, just cameras covering the front and back doors. But on a Friday morning, Rosa noticed that the camera pointing toward the back door was askew, pointing toward the ground instead of at the entrance. "Mrs. Catherine," Rosa called from the kitchen, "did someone adjust the back door camera?" Mrs. Catherine came to look, seeming genuinely surprised. "That's odd. I certainly didn't touch it. Maybe the wind knocked it loose?" But there had been no wind strong enough to move a securely mounted camera. Rosa examined it more closely and found that someone had deliberately loosened the mounting bracket. It would have taken tools and several minutes of work to do this. Someone had been on the property tampering with the security system. This discovery made Rosa's blood run cold. Someone was clearly planning something, and they were taking steps to avoid being recorded. She insisted on calling the security company to have the camera properly remounted and checked for tampering. While they waited for the technician, Rosa walked around the entire property, looking for any other signs that someone had been there. In the garden behind the house, she found footprints in the soft soil near the basement windows. The prints were fresh, made within the last day or two. They were too large to belong to Mrs. Catherine, and didn't match Rosa's shoes either. Someone had been walking around the house, checking windows and looking for potential entry points. Rosa took photos of the footprints with her phone and measured them with a ruler from Mrs. Catherine's kitchen. She was building evidence, though she wasn't sure yet what she would do with it. The security technician arrived that afternoon and confirmed Rosa's suspicions. The camera had definitely been tampered with, and recently, he also found that someone had attempted to cut through the wire connecting the front door camera, though they hadn't succeeded in disabling it completely. "You should report this to the police," the technician advised. "Someone is definitely trying to compromise your security system." But when Rosa suggested calling the police, Mrs. Catherine became agitated. "Oh, I don't want all that fuss and bother. It's probably just teenagers playing pranks. Let's not make a big deal out of it." Rosa couldn't understand Mrs. Catherine's reluctance to take the situation seriously. This wasn't teenage mischief. This was someone systematically gathering information and testing the security of the house. But she respected Mrs. Catherine's wishes and didn't call the police that day. That night, Rosa couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about all the strange occurrences of the past few weeks. The moved items, the mysterious phone calls, the surveillance van, the tampered security cameras, and the footprints in the garden. When she put it all together, it painted a picture that terrified her. Someone was planning to rob Mrs. Catherine's house. They knew about the valuable antiques and collectibles. They were learning Rosa's schedule to find the best time to strike. They were testing the security system to find weaknesses. And they were using the moved items inside the house to scout which pieces would be easiest to take. But what worried Rosa most was the feeling that this wasn't just about robbery. The level of planning and surveillance suggested something more serious. Someone wanted more than just Mrs. Catherine's possessions. They wanted her vulnerable, isolated, and unprotected. Rosa made a decision that night. Regardless of what Mrs. Catherine wanted, she was going to start documenting everything. Every strange occurrence, every suspicious phone call, every sighting of that blue van. If something terrible was being planned, she was going to make sure there was evidence to catch whoever was responsible. What Rosa didn't realize was that her careful attention to detail had already been noticed. The people watching Mrs. Catherine's house had also been watching Rosa, and they were beginning to see her not just as an obstacle to their plans, but as a direct threat that needed to be eliminated. The morning that changed everything started like any other. Rosa arrived at Mrs. Catherine's house at 8 o'clock sharp, the same time she had been coming for 3 years. She used her key to enter through the front door, calling out her usual greeting as she hung up her coat. "Good morning, Mrs. Catherine. I'm here." But instead of the warm response she expected, Rosa heard voices coming from the living room. Mrs. Catherine was talking to someone and she sounded upset. Rosa walked toward the voices, wondering who could be visiting so early in the morning. In the living room, she found Mrs. Catherine sitting in her favorite armchair, looking pale and shaken. Standing across from her was David, Mrs. Catherine's nephew, but he looked different today. His usual polite smile was gone, replaced by a cold, serious expression that made Rosa's stomach tighten with worry. "Oh, Rosa," Mrs. Catherine said, her voice trembling slightly. "David has something he needs to discuss with both of us." David turned to look at Rosa and she could see suspicion in his eyes. "Actually, this concerns Rosa directly. Aunt Catherine, I'm afraid I have some very serious news about your housekeeper." Rosa felt her heart start to race. "What do you mean?" "What news?" David reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small plastic bag. Inside was Mrs. Catherine's diamond brooch, the one that had belonged to her mother and was usually kept in the jewelry box upstairs. "I found this in Rosa's car yesterday," David announced, his voice cold and accusatory. "It was hidden under the front seat." Rosa stared at the bag in shock. "That's impossible. I would never take anything from Mrs. Catherine. How could you have been in my car?" "I saw it through the window when I was walking past in the parking lot downtown," David said smoothly. The brooch was clearly visible on the floor mat. "I had to break a window to retrieve Mrs. Catherine's property before you could sell it." "This is crazy," Rosa protested, looking desperately at Mrs. Catherine. "You know me. You know I would never steal from you." But Mrs. Catherine looked confused and hurt. Rosa could see the doubt growing in her eyes, and it broke her heart. "Rosa, dear, why would you take my mother's brooch? If you needed money, you could have asked me. I didn't take it," Rosa insisted. "Someone is trying to make it look like I did. Mrs. Catherine, you have to believe me." David shook his head sadly. "I'm afraid there's more evidence than just the brooch. Aunt Catherine, show Rosa what we found when we checked the security camera footage." Mrs. Catherine reluctantly picked up a tablet from the side table. On the screen was a video that appeared to show Rosa taking the brooch from Mrs. Catherine's jewelry box. But something about the video didn't look right to Rosa. The timestamp showed it was recorded on a day when she remembered doing laundry all afternoon, never going upstairs to the bedroom. "This isn't real," Rosa said, studying the video more carefully. "Look at what I'm wearing in the video. That's not the same outfit I wore that day. And see how the camera angle is different? Someone has changed this video." But David was ready for her objections. "Rosa, I understand this is difficult for you. Addiction and financial pressure can make people do things they never thought they would do. But we have clear evidence, and I'm afraid we have to call the police." "Addiction?" Rosa repeated, confused. "What are you talking about?" David pulled out his phone and showed Rosa a series of text messages that appeared to be from her number. The messages were asking someone about selling jewelry and mentioning debts that needed to be paid quickly. "These messages were sent from your phone to a known dealer in stolen goods," David explained. "We also found evidence that you've been researching the value of my aunt's antique collection online." Rosa felt like the ground was falling away beneath her feet. None of this was true, but somehow David had evidence for all of it. The text messages weren't from her, but they were coming from her phone number. The internet searches had never been done on her computer, but somehow there was a record of them. "David, this is all fake," Rosa said, her voice shaking with emotion. "Someone has set this up to make me look guilty. You have to know that I love Mrs. Catherine like family. I would never hurt her." Mrs. Catherine was crying now, torn between her trust in Rosa and the evidence being presented to her. "Rosa, I don't want to believe this, but David has shown me so much proof. The brooch, the video, these messages. How can I ignore all of this?" "Because it's all been manufactured," Rosa pleaded. "Mrs. Catherine, think about all the strange things that have been happening. The moved items, the phone calls asking about my schedule, the van watching the house. Someone has been planning this for weeks." But David had an answer for that too. "Rosa, paranoid behavior is often a sign of guilt. You've been nervous because you knew you were stealing, not because someone was watching the house. Rosa realized with growing horror that every concern she had raised over the past few weeks was now being used against her. Her careful attention to suspicious activities was being twisted to make her look paranoid and guilty. The police arrived an hour later. Rosa watched in numb shock as they listened to David's accusations and examined his evidence. To them, it looked like a clear case of domestic theft. They had a suspect with access to the house, physical evidence, video footage, and digital communications. From their perspective, Rosa's denials just sounded like the desperate lies of someone who had been caught. "Ma'am, you're under arrest. For theft," the officer said, approaching Rosa with handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent." As the handcuffs clicked into place, Rosa looked at Mrs. Catherine one last time. The older woman was sobbing, her face filled with betrayal and confusion. "Mrs. Catherine, please," Rosa said, as the officers led her toward the door. "Remember what I told you about your nephew. Be careful. Don't let him convince you to change anything important until you're sure about what really happened here." But David was already moving to comfort his aunt, positioning himself as her protector, now that the dangerous housekeeper had been removed from the house. At the police station, Rosa tried to explain about the suspicious activities she had noticed, but no one seemed interested in listening. To them, she was just another domestic worker who had gotten greedy and been caught stealing from her wealthy employer. They had seen cases like this before. Rosa was allowed one phone call. She called her sister, sobbing as she explained what had happened. "I need help," she said. "Someone has framed me and I don't know how to prove it." As she sat in the holding cell that night, Rosa's mind raced through everything that had happened. David had been planning this for weeks, maybe months. He had somehow gotten access to her car to plant the brooch. He had created fake text messages and manipulated the security footage. He had even arranged for the suspicious activities around the house, probably to make Rosa seem paranoid when she reported them. But why go to all this trouble just to frame a housekeeper? Rosa thought about Mrs. Catherine's valuable antique collection, her large house, and her trusting nature. With Rosa out of the picture, David would be the only person Mrs. Catherine could turn to for help and support. Rosa realized with chilling clarity that this wasn't really about framing her for theft. This was about isolating Mrs. Catherine from the one person who truly cared about her welfare. With Rosa gone, accused of betraying Mrs. Catherine's trust, David would have free access to influence his aunt in whatever way he wanted. The frame-up was just the beginning of David's plan. Rosa was terrified to think about what might happen to Mrs. Catherine now that her protector had been removed from the picture. But from a jail cell, there was nothing Rosa could do to help the woman who had become like a mother to her. All she could do was hope that somehow, some way, the truth would come to light before it was too late. But as she lay on the hard cot that night, listening to the sounds of the jail around her, Rosa couldn't help but wonder if David's plan was already too far along to stop. Rosa's sister Carmen picked her up from jail the next morning after posting bail with money borrowed from their church community. The ride home was silent except for Rosa's quiet sobs and Carmen's whispered prayers. Rosa had lost everything in one day: her job, her reputation, and worst of all, the trust of someone she loved like family. "Rosa, you have to fight this," Carmen said as they pulled into her driveway. "Everyone who knows you knows you're not a thief. We'll find a way to prove your innocence." But Rosa felt hopeless. "How can I fight video evidence and text messages? David has made it look so real. Even Mrs. Catherine believes I stole from her." Carmen gripped her sister's hand firmly. "Then we find someone who can help us prove it's all fake. There has to be a way." That evening, Rosa sat at Carmen's kitchen table, staring at the business card the public defender had given her. She knew the overworked lawyer would do his best, but he had dozens of other cases and limited time for investigation. If Rosa was going to prove her innocence, she needed help from someone who could focus entirely on her case. Rosa thought about the small amount of money she had saved over 3 years of working for Mrs. Catherine. She had been putting it aside for her children's education, but what good would that money do if she was convicted of theft and could never find decent work again? The next morning, Rosa called every private investigator in the phone. book until she found one who was willing to meet with her. Thomas Mitchell was a former police detective who had started his own investigation business after retiring. His office was small and cluttered, but his eyes were sharp and interested as Rosa told her story. "You're saying all this evidence was fabricated?" Thomas asked, taking notes as Rosa spoke. "I know how it sounds," Rosa replied. "But I swear to you I never took anything from Mrs. Catherine. Someone went to a lot of trouble to make it look like I did." Thomas leaned back in his chair. "Framing someone for theft isn't easy. It requires planning, technical skills, and access to the victim's property. Who would have both the motive and the ability to do something like this?" Rosa told him about David's increasing visits to his aunt's house, his questions about the valuable items, and his suggestions that Mrs. Catherine should downsize. She also described all the suspicious activities she had noticed in the weeks before her arrest. "This nephew sounds like our primary suspect," Thomas said. "But proving he framed you won't be simple. We'll need to find evidence that he had access to your car, that he manipulated the security footage, and that he created those fake text messages." Thomas quoted his fee, and Rosa's heart sank. It was almost every penny she had saved, but Carmen, who had come with her for support, spoke up immediately. "We'll find the money," Carmen said firmly. "Our family, our church community, we'll all contribute. Rosa is innocent and we're going to prove it." Thomas nodded and shook Rosa's hand. "I'll start by examining all the evidence the police collected. Sometimes the details that seem to support a frame-up actually reveal how it was done." While Thomas began his investigation, Rosa tried to continue with her daily life, but everything felt different. Neighbors who had known her for years now looked at her with suspicion. The grocery store clerk who used to chat with her now watched her carefully, as if expecting her to steal something. The story of her arrest had spread through the community, and Rosa felt the weight of everyone's judgment. Thomas called Rosa 3 days later with his first breakthrough. "I've examined the security footage and you were right to be suspicious. The video has definitely been altered. The timestamp matches a day when you were supposedly in the house, but the lighting and shadows don't match the weather conditions for that day." "Can you prove it was changed?" Rosa asked hopefully. "I'm working on it. I've also started looking into David's background. Did you know he has significant gambling debts? He owes money to some very unpleasant people who don't like to wait for payment." This news didn't surprise Rosa. It explained why David would be so desperate to get access to his aunt's money. But she was worried about Mrs. Catherine's safety. "Is Mrs. Catherine in danger?" "Possibly," Thomas admitted. "People who are desperate enough to frame innocent people for theft might be desperate enough to do other things. I think we need to work quickly." Thomas spent the next week digging into every aspect of David's life and the evidence against Rosa. He discovered that David had been visiting an electronics store that specialized in video editing equipment. He had also been seen in Rosa's neighborhood on the day before her arrest, which gave him the opportunity to plant the brooch in her car. But the biggest breakthrough came when Thomas examined Rosa's phone records more carefully. The text messages that were supposedly sent from your phone to the stolen goods dealer, they were actually sent using a phone cloning device. Someone copied your phone's identity and sent those messages from a different device. "Can you prove that David did it?" Rosa asked. "I'm getting closer. The electronics store where he bought the video equipment also sells phone cloning devices, and I found a witness who saw him in the parking lot near your car the day before your arrest." Meanwhile, Rosa was getting disturbing reports about Mrs. Catherine from mutual friends in the neighborhood. The older woman had become increasingly isolated since Rosa's arrest. David was visiting every day now, and neighbors noticed that Mrs. Catherine seemed confused and forgetful in ways she never had before. "She asked me the same question 3 times during our conversation," Rosa's friend Elena told her, "and she seemed scared when I mentioned your name. It's like she doesn't trust her own memory anymore." Rosa's heart ached with worry. Mrs. Catherine had always been sharp and alert. If she was becoming confused and forgetful so suddenly, something was very wrong. Thomas shared Rosa's concerns when she told him about Mrs. Catherine's condition. Isolation and psychological manipulation can cause confusion in elderly people. But there might be something else going on too. "Has Mrs. Catherine had any recent changes in her medications or daily routine?" Rosa thought carefully. David has been helping her with her pills lately. He said it was too confusing for her to manage them herself. Thomas's expression grew serious. Rosa, I think we need to consider the possibility that David isn't just stealing from his aunt. He might be drugging her to make her more compliant and confused. The idea horrified Rosa, but it made terrible sense. If David was giving Mrs. Catherine medication to cloud her thinking, it would explain her sudden confusion and her willingness to believe the evidence against Rosa. We have to do something, Rosa said urgently. Mrs. Catherine is in real danger. I know, Thomas replied. But we still need solid proof of what David is doing. Accusations without evidence won't help Mrs. Catherine, and they might make things worse for you. Thomas intensified his investigation, working around the clock to gather evidence. He obtained security footage from the electronics store showing David purchasing video editing equipment. He interviewed the witness who had seen David near Rosa's car. He even managed to get copies of David's phone records, which showed calls to the stolen goods dealer on the same days the fake text messages were sent. But the strongest evidence came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Catherine's regular pharmacist called Thomas after hearing about the case through mutual friends. The pharmacist explained that David had been picking up his aunt's prescriptions for the past month, but he had also been filling prescriptions for medications that weren't on Mrs. Catherine's regular list. These are powerful sedatives, the pharmacist explained. They can cause confusion, memory loss, and disorientation if given to someone who doesn't need them. I was starting to worry about Mrs. Catherine's condition, but her nephew said her doctor had prescribed them for anxiety. Thomas immediately contacted Mrs. Catherine's actual doctor, who confirmed that he had never prescribed any sedatives for her. David had been getting the medications using forged prescriptions. Now we have him, Thomas told Rosa. David has been systematically drugging his aunt to make her confused and compliant. He framed you to remove the one person who might have noticed what he was doing. And he's been positioning himself to inherit her estate while she's too drugged to think clearly. Rosa felt a mixture of relief and terror. Relief that they finally had proof of David's crimes, but terror at what might have happened to Mrs. Catherine during all the time she had been taking those dangerous medications. We have to get this evidence to the police immediately, Rosa said. Mrs. Catherine's life might depend on it. Thomas nodded grimly. I'm calling the detective who handled your case right now. And Rosa, pack a bag. Once this evidence comes out, you're going to be cleared of all charges. You might be going home to Mrs. Catherine sooner than you think. Detective Sarah Williams sat across from Thomas Mitchell in the police station, studying the evidence he had compiled. The detective who had originally handled Rosa's case was off duty, but Detective Williams was known for her thoroughness and her willingness to re-examine cases when new evidence emerged. This is quite a collection of evidence, Detective Williams said, flipping through Thomas's report. Video analysis showing manipulation. Phone records proving the text messages were sent using cloning technology, witness statements, and now evidence of prescription fraud and elder abuse. Thomas nodded grimly. David Peterson has been running a complex scheme to isolate his aunt and gain control of her assets. Rosa was just an innocent victim who got in his way. The pharmaceutical evidence is particularly concerning, the detective continued. If he's been drugging Mrs. Catherine with unauthorized sedatives, her life could be in immediate danger. We need to act quickly. Within an hour, Detective Williams had obtained search warrants for David's apartment and phone records. She also arranged for paramedics to check on Mrs. Catherine's condition. Rosa waited anxiously at the police station while the operation unfolded. The search of David's apartment revealed a treasure trove of evidence. Police found the video editing equipment he had used to alter the security footage, the phone cloning device used to send the fake text messages, and even detailed plans outlining his scheme to frame Rosa and manipulate his aunt. But most disturbing was what they found in David's bedroom: bottles of the same sedatives that had been prescribed under forged prescriptions, along with handwritten notes detailing dosages and effects. David had been experimenting with different amounts of medication to find the right level to keep Mrs. Catherine confused, but not obviously. Ill Detective Williams called Rosa with updates as the evidence mounted. We found everything, Rosa. David documented his entire plan in notebooks. He even wrote about how removing you from the picture was essential to gaining control over his aunt. What about Mrs. Catherine? Rosa asked urgently. Is she safe? The paramedics are with her now. She's conscious and stable, but she's been heavily sedated. We're taking her to the hospital to flush the drugs from her system and make sure there's no permanent damage." Rosa felt tears of relief streaming down her face. "Can I see her?" "Soon," Detective Williams promised. "We're bringing David in for questioning right now. Once we have him in custody, you'll be free to go to the hospital." David's arrest happened so quickly he barely had time to react. He was at Mrs. Catherine's house when the police arrived, ostensibly caring for his confused aunt but actually ensuring she took her daily dose of unauthorized medication. When Detective Williams confronted him with the evidence, David's carefully constructed facade crumbled immediately. "I don't know what you're talking about," David insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. The detailed notebooks found in his apartment made any denial impossible. "Mr. Peterson," Detective Williams said calmly, "we have video footage of you purchasing equipment to alter security recordings. We have witnesses who saw you near Rosa's car. We have your phone records showing calls to dealers and stolen goods. And we have evidence that you've been systematically drugging your aunt with forged prescriptions." David's shoulders sagged as he realized his scheme had been completely exposed. "You don't understand the pressure I was under. I owed money to dangerous people. I needed access to my aunt's assets. So you decided to frame an innocent woman and drug your elderly aunt?" Detective Williams asked with disgust. As David was led away in handcuffs, Rosa was finally free to rush to the hospital. She found Mrs. Catherine in a private room looking frail but alert for the first time in weeks. The older woman's eyes filled with tears when she saw Rosa walk through the door. "Rosa, my dear," Mrs. Catherine whispered, reaching out with shaking hands. "I'm so sorry. I should have believed you. I should have trusted my heart instead of the evidence." Rosa took Mrs. Catherine's hands in hers, feeling overwhelmed with emotion. "Don't apologize. You were being drugged. David was making you confused on purpose. None of this was your fault. But I let them arrest you," Mrs. Catherine said, tears flowing freely now. "I let them take you away when you had done nothing but love and care for me." "That's all behind us now," Rosa said firmly. "What matters is that you're safe and the truth has come out." Dr. Martinez, Mrs. Catherine's physician, explained that the unauthorized sedatives would be completely out of her system within a few days. The confusion and memory problems should clear up as the drugs leave her system. Physically, she should make a complete recovery. Over the next several days, as Mrs. Catherine's mind cleared, the full scope of David's manipulation became apparent. He had been gradually increasing the medication dosages while convincing his aunt that her confusion was a natural part of aging. He had also been pressuring her to sign legal documents that would give him power of attorney and make him the primary beneficiary of her will. "He told me I was becoming incompetent," Mrs. Catherine told Rosa as they sat together in her hospital room. "He said it was cruel to burden you with caring for someone who was losing her mind. I started to believe that maybe I was becoming a danger to myself and others." Rosa held her friend's hand tightly. "You were never incompetent. You were being poisoned by someone you trusted. That's not your fault." The legal proceedings moved quickly once all the evidence was presented. David was charged with elder abuse, prescription fraud, theft, evidence tampering, and framing an innocent person. The evidence against him was so overwhelming that his lawyer advised him to accept a plea bargain. All charges against Rosa were immediately dropped, and the district attorney issued a public apology for the wrongful arrest. The story made headlines in the local newspapers, with Rosa being praised as a hero who had tried to protect her employer, even when it meant putting herself at risk. But for Rosa, the most important moment came when Mrs. Catherine was finally released from the hospital, and they returned to the house on Maple Street together. As they walked through the front door, Mrs. Catherine stopped and looked around at her beautiful home with clear eyes for the first time in months. "It feels good to be home," Mrs. Catherine said softly, "but it only feels like home because you're here with me." Rosa smiled, feeling a warmth in her heart that she had missed desperately during the long, dark weeks of being accused and arrested. "I'm not going anywhere, Mrs. Catherine. We're family, and family sticks together." Mrs. Catherine had one more surprise for Rosa. She had decided to update her will to include Rosa as a significant beneficiary, not because she felt guilty about what had happened, but because she realized how much Rosa truly meant to her. "You risked everything to try to protect me," Mrs. Catherine explained. "Even when I didn't believe you, even when you were facing jail time, you were still worried about my safety. That kind of loyalty and love deserves to be recognized." Rosa was touched by the gesture, but she insisted that their friendship was reward enough. I don't need money to prove that I care about you. I just need to know that you're safe and happy. The two women settled back into their comfortable routines, but their relationship was stronger than ever. They had survived a terrible ordeal that had tested their bond, and they had emerged with an even deeper appreciation for each other. Thomas Mitchell visited them a few weeks after David's conviction to check on how they were doing. He found them in the garden working together to plant new flowers for the spring. You know, Thomas said to Rosa, what you did was remarkably brave. Not many people would have kept fighting to protect someone who didn't believe in their innocence. Rosa looked up from the flower bed, dirt on her hands and happiness in her eyes. When you love someone like family, you don't give up on them, even when things look hopeless. Sometimes the most unexpected outcomes come from simply refusing to stop caring. Mrs. Catherine smiled at her dear friend and nodded in agreement. Rosa saved my life in more ways than one. She protected me from David's scheme, but more importantly, she showed me what true loyalty looks like. I'm the one who was stunned by the unexpected outcome. I never expected to find such a treasure in someone I initially hired just to clean my house. As the sun set over the garden where they worked side by side, both women knew that they had weathered the storm together and emerged with something more precious than any antique or valuable collection. They had discovered the unbreakable bond of chosen family, and no scheme or deception could ever take that away from them.